I thought I'd do something a little bit different today, and this is actually going to be based off a fellow YouTuber's video that I sort of saw recently, that being Falagar517, and he did his top 5 Marvel characters, and I thought, do you know what, I'm a big Marvel fan, I should actually do kind of the same sort of thing. So go and check out Falagar's list if you haven't seen them already. So my list is going to be more based on the comics and the movies, and like I said, this is my personal favourite list. I'm not saying this is what everyone should like and anything like that. This is just my personal list, but I'm also going to do a couple of honourable mentions as well, who are just sort of bubbling on there. I don't want to make the list too big. So the first honourable mention I'm going to give is the Punisher. Of course, he's kind of one of the more mainstream characters, and is less a superhero, more of a kind of armed vigilante. And then we have seen him in actually 3 movies so far. I actually like the Dolph Lundgren one the best, I've got to say. Dracula. Now, Dracula is actually a public domain character, so he can be used in anything, basically. Now, you've actually seen a few iterations of the Marvel version of Dracula. I've always kind of been a big fan of him, but I actually really like the modern incarnation. We've sort of seen him in the sort of Tomb of Dracula initially, and he kind of looked a little bit sort of more of a kind of Hammer-style vampire there. But I really like his kind of modern incarnation, with his kind of like, he's a lot bigger and the kind of red armour, and he actually did quite a good guest appearance in one of the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoons, the White Tiger. I'm actually talking about the original White Tiger, not the kind of the more recent female version. So the original White Tiger debuted in the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, and you know, I liked him. I have to say, what initially attracted me to him was his costume. I thought he had a cool costume. It's essentially, it looks a little bit like Black Panther, but just in white, and he's basically a Hispanic guy who gets this kind of like necklace that gives him kind of like, you know, superpowers, and he's kind of a martial arts sort of style character, and he actually gets gunned down, I think in, I can't remember if it's either Spider-Man or Daredevil, it was one of those two, and he actually gets killed, and obviously in modern iterations, I think one of his sort of relatives, he sort of takes over the mantle, so to speak. But I actually quite like the original White Tiger, because he was kind of quite a cool character. He never really had his own book, so to speak. He's more kind of, apart from the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, he's more of a supporting character. So number 10 is going to be Simon Garth, and otherwise known as Zombie. Now, he actually debuted in a story written by Stan Lee in 1953, so he even predates like the likes of Spider-Man, although we didn't really see him in comic form until the kind of the early 70s, where he sort of starred in Tales of a Zombie, which is kind of, like I said, a horror-based comic. And Simon Garth was basically a little bit like the kind of Incredible Hulk TV show. He was kind of like a wandering monster who would kind of get into adventures, and he would ultimately sort of be controlled by kind of whoever would wear this sort of amulet, basically. And you know, he managed to sort of get a certain degree of his memories back and things like that from time to time. We've seen him kind of more recently in a Mac series as well. But like, I always quite liked Simon Garth. Number 9 is Venom. So Venom, as I say, has been a villain. He has been a kind of anti-hero, so this is why I'm kind of including him in my top 10 heroes list. So Venom has actually had a number of different people actually having the Venom symbiote. Currently it's Flash Gordon in the comics. Flash Gordon, Flash Thompson, but I actually preferred the Eddie Brock Venom, who was the kind of the original Venom, I have to say. And I quite like the Eddie Brock character. I quite liked it when Eddie Brock became anti-Venom as well in the books. So Venom is my number 9. So number 8. So this is why I say of all time here, because this character isn't even a Marvel character anymore. I'm talking about Rom. Now, Rom was the greatest of the Space Knights, and he's got quite an interesting backstory actually, because what happened with him is that Parker Brothers basically acquired a toy, and without any kind of characterization, they really didn't know how to market it. So basically what they did was they hired Marvel to create a kind of backstory and kind of include him in the sort of the Marvel continuity to basically make his kind of toy more sellable, basically, and they did. Now, they've actually done this a couple of times, most notably with Transformers. Yes, Marvel did actually have a hand in creating the actual Transformers, so their kind of personalities and stuff like that, and their sort of backstory. They didn't design them, of course, but they created the sort of mythology that surrounds them. And that's what happened with Rom. So Rom was basically space characters, I guess you would call him, and he's kind of would fight against the, sort of the Dire Wraiths, which were his kind of his main bad guy. And he had really like a cool look. The rights Marvel don't have the rights to him anymore. They can't even reference him. So technically speaking, he isn't a Marvel character anymore, but he was. And when he was in his comics, the actual toy failed, and the the comic kept on going for, I believe it was around 75 issues or something around that sort of mark, and the comics actually kept on going long after the actual toy had pretty much given up the ghost. But you know, he kind of faced off with a variety of different your kind of mainstream Marvel characters. Number 7, Captain Britain. Of course, I'm English, so I'm gonna like Captain Britain here. Now he's had a few different sort of costume changes throughout the years. I actually do prefer his kind of, I guess, his 80s look, to be honest, rather than, although his modern look is sort of similar-ish, but I liked him in his kind of the 80s look. And he's basically the kind of, I guess, the British equivalent of Captain America, but his powers are sort of a lot more sort of fantastic. He can fly and that sort of thing. There's sort of a variety of different kind of other sort of supernatural powers, so to speak. And he's protector of all these sort of different realms. And basically he debuted in Captain Britain Weekly #1, and that was in 1986. Anyway, number 6, we're going to go on to Beta Ray Bill. So Beta Ray Bill is a Thor offshoot character, and he was basically a kind of alien being who was sort of in charge of protecting his race on a kind of ship as they sort of try to escape some kind of evil. And he was this sort of almost like a cyborg version of their kind of alien race, who had been sort of designed to sort of, you know, have all these attachments and stuff so he could sort of defend the fleet and all that sort of thing. Anyway, he had a run-in with Thor, and he debuted in Thor 337. And basically sort of took over the power of Thor and actually managed to hold Mjolnir, basically, and sort of became sort of Beta Ray Bill, or Beta Ray Thor as he's sometimes known. And you know, eventually Odin gave him his own hammer, and he sort of became essentially a honorary Asgardian, essentially. And he's kind of got this horse face, but I really like his look. I think he's quite cool. Okay, number 5, Death's Head. So Death's Head again is an interesting character. Death's Head it's a British creation. I believe it's Simon Furman that actually created Death's Head, and he was introduced in the Marvel run of Transformers. And basically the Marvel comics used to come out weekly, so they had to sort of create more content than the Americans were kind of making. They came out every month, so the sort of space in between the kind of the American issues, the British came out with their own sort of versions, and a lot of people prefer the British stories, so they're a bit more in depth. And Death's Head was part of them, and he was essentially this kind of robotic bounty hunter. And the interesting thing is that because they created this original character in a Transformers comic, or was going to be for a Transformers comic, they were worried that his rights would then be held by Hasbro. So basically he was published in a kind of just a one-page story in other Marvel comics first, called High Noon Text, and this basically meant that Marvel retained the right to Death's Head, otherwise they would go to Hasbro. So anyway, Death's Head had run into Transformers, and he was obviously a Transformers-sized character first of all, and he's had run into a variety of different Marvel characters since then. And Doctor Who was kind of also a cross paths, and Doctor Who shrunk him down to kind of like a human size, and therefore he could interact with the likes of the Fantastic Four, She-Hulk, and he sort of popped up now and then throughout the kind of the Marvel history. I mean, he's had a few other iterations as well. He had Death's Head 2, which I didn't like, I've got to say, and then more recently Death's Head 3 was also I didn't like. The original Death's Head was by far and away the best, and he's kind of back in sort of a limited capacity here and there. Number 4, She-Hulk. So there's all sorts of interesting stories about these things. So She-Hulk basically was created because the Marvel was worried that other companies would basically try and rip off the success of Hulk and other kind of male heroes by creating female versions of them, and just kind of like, because they didn't have the rights necessarily to other companies have the rights to Hulk, they could essentially make a kind of female version and call it She-Hulk. So to beat them to the punch, basically Marvel created a variety of kind of female offshoot characters, and the same was said to be true of Spider-Woman. But She-Hulk was obviously an offshoot of the original Incredible Hulk. And the story is here that basically she is Bruce Banner's cousin, and Bruce Banner has to give her a blood transfusion, which sort of basically gives her kind of Hulk-like powers. Initially her powers were kind of near enough the same as Hulk, but to a lesser degree. But more modern iterations of She-Hulk has changed her basically. This is what I prefer. And essentially she has kind of retained her intelligence. and really is able to sort of transform into She-Hulk at will. But the interesting thing I like about She-Hulk is that really she kind of chooses to almost ignore her human persona, who she sees as kind of quite dowdy and boring, and kind of really remain in her sort of She-Hulk guise. And she's quite kind of sexually aggressive, and she's almost a little bit like Deadpool in the fact that she's her kind of comics are sometimes a little bit self-aware, not all the time, but but on occasion. And I actually find her quite a good comedic character. I remember one comic, I think it was one of her sort of initial sort of solo runs. She's basically in bed with this kind of male model, and she accidentally, while she's asleep, transforms back into Jennifer Walters, her human ego, and is like desperate to transform back into She-Hulk before he wakes up. And then the male model eventually wakes up and she's back in her She-Hulk form, and he thinks she's too shallow, so ditches her off, which I thought was quite funny. Number 3 is Ghost Rider. So Ghost Rider, of course, a supernatural kind of superhero or / anti-hero from the Marvel sort of universe, really. And Ghost Rider's got one of the coolest looks about him. He's got a flaming head, biker leathers and everything. He looks like a cool dude. He looks badass. He's got a cool set of powers. And is actually one of the most powerful characters in the kind of the Marvel canon, basically. He's had a couple of movies, which I have to say I didn't mind the first one. The second one I didn't think was too good. But nonetheless, he's had, again, a couple of different sort of people become the mantle of Ghost Rider. It was originally Johnny Blaze, first of all, and Ghost Rider initially debuted in Marvel Spotlight issue 5, and that was in 1972. So, he's never really had a kind of a really great story, and this is the problem with the kind of the Ghost Rider films, is that although he's a cool character, he's not had a really kind of like memorable story like a lot of the other sort of characters have had. So number 2, Man-Thing. So Man-Thing debuted in Savage Tales issue 1 in 1971. Now, I've talked about Man-Thing before in previous videos. He's less of a character as such, more of a kind of monster. And basically, Man-Thing was a human once called Ted Salis, who was sort of transformed into this kind of swamp creature. Now, he's very similar in a way to DC's Swamp Thing, and there's a little bit of debate which one came first. And apparently they both sort of say they're pretty much made around the same time, just coincidentally. Anyway, and Man-Thing, the difference with Man-Thing is he doesn't really sort of think for himself. He's more just sort of runs of instinct, really, and he's kind of drawn to emotions. And his comics are always kind of creepy, and you never really know how he was going to react, because he'd not necessarily react in a heroic way a lot of the time. Most of the time he would, but sometimes he would just kind of like just burden people just because they happened to be in his way. And he'd sort of come with blows of different kind of superheroes from time to time. He's a difficult character to kind of do a lot with, because he's so reliant on the kind of the swamp life, basically, because this is obviously what he is. So occasionally he's been taken out. He was in the Thunderbolts kind of more recently, and has just sort of developed a sort of transporter sort of type power. But nevertheless, Man-Thing looks cool. He has had a film which I had to say was a little disappointing. Nonetheless, it was nice to sort of see a kind of version of a Man-Thing movie, even if it was pretty much a B movie. So number 1, I'm going to go mainstream on this one, Spider-Man. Spider-Man is my number 1 favourite character. So despite all my kind of more obscure characters, I have to say I like Spider-Man. He's my favourite hero, probably overall, out of any type of superhero, be it Marvel, DC or whatever. So Spider-Man debuted in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, and that was in 1962. And what I liked about Spider-Man was precisely probably what everyone else likes about Spider-Man, is that he's kind of this relatable character, and he has all these kind of stuff going on in his sort of personal life as well, which, is just as interesting as what's happening in his kind of crime fighting life, arguably. Yes, he's had some lows. Yes, I'm talking about the One More Day storyline, for example, I think it's called, which I totally hated. There you go. But nonetheless, I still kind of find his kind of exploits funny. He's a funny character to read. He's always pretty interesting. I mean, he's the one sort of character I've pretty much followed, since I've been a fan of comics right from the get-go. Yes, there are some other sort of more mainstream characters that I do quite like as well. I quite like Wolverine, but I have to say I didn't want to make this list too long. But Spider-Man overall is my number 1. So let me tell you, what's your top 5? Give me your top 5 Marvel superheroes, and leave it in the comments below. I look forward to seeing you next time, and don't forget to go and check out Falagar's channel as well to check out his top 5. Thanks for watching. Bye.